Resonance is the key to everything. When two organisms share the same resonance, information is exchanged between them. Understand this, and you'll come to know what ancient temples can do for you and to you. It's one of the great secrets of the mysteries, and it's what lies behind sacred sites and the healing power of resonance. As humans, we can't help being attracted and distracted by the visual beauty of ancient temples and other sacred places. We marvel at their physical characteristics, admire their ornamentation, stand in awe of their elegance. And yet behind their outward appearance, there's a lot more going on. In ancient Egypt, for example, the temple was not regarded as a physical object, but looked upon as a living entity, to the point where prayers were conducted at dawn by priests who walked every room chanting as though rousing a sleeping being from slumber. Their architects describe how temples were designed for times when people lost their connection to the elemental world around them. The temple was there as a reminder of their godliness without religious overtones. You could say the temples are the original self-help centers, particularly when they share a rich history of healing. The idea that sacred sites have curative properties is an ancient one. For thousands of years, people have visited these temples to interact with their energy, particularly those in need of improving their well-being. Such a long tradition obviously proves there is something about them that works. Even today, mothers still take their sick children to these standing stones and pass them through the ring 7 times, in accordance with the local legend. It's like a Neolithic version of a CAT scan and a lot cheaper. It is true that this type of stone chosen for this temple is naturally radioactive, just enough to trigger the body's immune system and eradicate harmful bacteria. So these pilgrims, both ancient and modern, were right. There is an invisible technology at work behind the scenes. Similar miracles have been taking place for over 4,000 years at Santuario de Chimayo, a site once used by the Anasazi, who came here to use its healing mud. Although it is now a highly Christianized site, the efficacious soil is still sought after, and judging by the number of crutches discarded inside the church, clearly it still works. This healing ability is also true of sacred springs. These are the original sacred sites. Later they were adapted into holy wells, and each well is associated with a specific cure. Some work for the eyes, others for liver, limbs, even rickets. One famous holy well lies beneath Chartres Cathedral. And long before this magnificent building was erected, even before the times of Druids, people undertook pilgrimage here to drink the curative water. After all, there is a good reason why this is called the Well of the Strong. The effectiveness of the water is due in part to its dissolved mineral content, as well as the electromagnetic properties that flow through the location and its geology, making for a very potent combination. Out of the thousands of case histories of people's interaction with sacred sites, perhaps my favorite is a story of Englishman John Trelyle, born in 1640 with twisted limbs. For the first 16 years of his life, he was partially paralyzed, but after experiencing a prophetic dream, he was instructed to crawl around a particular holy well 3 times, then bathe in its waters and sleep above the underground stream. In the following days, he regained strength and was completely cured of the knotted sinews of his limbs. In fact, John went on to enlist in the king's army, where he served gallantly for many years. When you enter a temple, what you're actually walking into is an invisible world of harmonics, resonance, and subtle energies. When combined, these elements affect the human body to an extraordinary degree, because both the human temple and the constructed temple are built upon the same laws, and that is the laws of nature. If you look at the human body, it's actually not very physical at all. It's a series of atoms and molecules spiraling at enormous speed, giving the illusion of solid appearance. But squeeze all the air out, and what you'd be left with would fit in a teaspoon. And then there's DNA, the essence of who we are. At its core, its chemical bonds are constructed from two geometric shapes, the hexagram and the pentagram. Expressed numerically, that's a ratio of 6:5. This ratio is also inherent in the temple we come from, the Earth. The reason why life exists here and on no other part of the solar system is due to the unusual rotation of the Earth. The pole completes a full cycle every 25,920 years. While this is taking place, the Earth's axis tilts 4 degrees over the course of 21,000 years. The ratio between the two is again 6:5. Thus, the Earth is mirrored inside the human body. This correspondence establishes a direct relationship between the two and probably lies at the heart of why we are drawn to geometric forms. Such harmonic resonance defines everything around us, even in the subatomic world. It is the underlying language of nature, the very essence of life, and is particularly obvious when it manifests in the simplest single-cell organisms called diatoms. This resonance is also the foundation of sound, for when sound is made visible and photographed, it displays the very same harmonic forms, proving that vibration is an essential component in the process of manifestation. These scientific observations are actually fundamental beliefs in every ancient culture, and they incorporated these concepts in their sacred art. To them, actions taking place in the physical follow the rules and principles of harmonic resonance taking place in the non-physical. The temple builders applied these rules in a practical way. Because sacred geometry epitomizes the perfection of nature, what they call the domain of the gods, ancient architects encoded these harmonics invisibly in the blueprint of temples. It is disguised in the way the elements relate to each other. The temples feel right because their proportions are based on natural laws. It is part of the reason why sacred places affect our senses. Their harmonics interact with our subconscious. They remind us of this perfection that we strive for in our lives. Because every geometric form is an expression of an underlying consciousness, each shape was observed in nature and deliberately chosen to generate an environment for each temple that induces a desired effect. One excellent example is Stonehenge. As far as the average troglodyte is concerned, Stonehenge is a jumble of large rocks, but underneath its skin, every form of sacred geometry lies concealed, each shape defining the placement of its arcs and circles. The builders of sacred space also understood that intent is an energy in itself, a view now accepted throughout the enlightened scientific community. So when a group of people enters Stonehenge with the intent to work with, say, healing and the application of the life force, that intent triggers the only parts of Stonehenge that are defined by the pentagram. When another group works with sound, on the other hand, they will invoke the geometry associated with sound, the 7-sided heptagram, and thus the entire original site. The same idea was employed in Gothic cathedrals by people following the exact same recipe, and it is not by accident that visitors to places like Chartres are significantly moved inside these buildings above any other design of the period. The effect has little to do with religious belief and more to do with the interaction between the body and the resonant environment. To prove this, experiments by scientists in Bulgaria found that building hospital rooms shaped like pentagrams improved the rate of health. Rooms shaped like trapezoids improved schizophrenia, and spherical shapes improved the coagulation of blood. Our ancestors also understood that the energy of an object does not stop at its physical boundary, that all forms possess a radiant energy field. And we call this field by different names: aura, resonance, radiance, morphic field, chi. Regardless, it is a field that exists around an organism where information is stored. You could call it the organism's business card or soul. When the energy of two organisms intersects and their resonance is sympathetic with one another, a bond takes place and information is transferred between the two. We know this process by another common name: love. Since ancient times, people were known to have the innate capacity to fully engage with this invisible universe, with the source, hence the term sorcerer. The problem is that at some point over the course of time on Earth, things go very, very wrong. Ego takes over. You begin to associate with the material world to a point where you become disconnected from the source. In such a state, the orderly geometry of your atoms and molecules becomes disorderly. You enter a state of duality, a separation between physical and spiritual. To put it simply, you are no longer at ease with your environment. Instead, you have become diseased. To remedy the problem, the temple builders created environments to remind people of their state of perfection and bring them into a state of balance. In fact, a phrase written inside certain temples states that the temple is there to, quote, transform the person into a god, into a bright star. In other words, the temple was built to alter that which has become imperfect into something perfect. At the temple of Edfu, they even made a joke about it, and it reads, "We will keep building temples until people recognize the temple in themselves." Let us now look at what makes temples energetically active and why they were looked upon as living beings. First, all sacred sites, without exception, are located on magnetic hotspots. Decades of research in Britain reveals how hundreds of its main ancient sites are sited along the path of two of the Earth's major electromagnetic pathways. Another major study, this time in northern France, was conducted by an electrical engineer named Pierre Moreau. Interestingly, he was skeptical that ancient megaliths held any special powers, that such things were figments of the New Age imagination. Moreau concluded his painstaking scientific work by admitting that the sites are alive. The structures such as dolmens behave like resonators, menhirs like coils, and stone circles like batteries. And what's more, these supposedly dead lumps of stone actually received, stored, and emitted electrical pulses at regular intervals. He essentially validated all the world myths describing standing stones as living entities, as sensitive beings who are congenial and yet, like us, are easily offended. We can now understand why people use the very same sacred sites to heal all manner of ailments, even to facilitate childbirth for thousands of years. Until recently, fertility dances were performed in Northern Europe, in which women would slide the stones between their legs to improve conception. A few years ago, I undertook an experiment to monitor the energy field of a sacred mound in England. This animation shows the mound from above, and the ripples of energy measured every 2 weeks over the course of 1 year. Red is positive or masculine polarity, blue is negative or female polarity. And shown in sequence, these ripples move as though the site is breathing in and out. But what amazed me most was the spatial relationship between the ripples. Each space is defined by the very sacred geometry that defines the orbits of planets on organic life forms on Earth. So this humble sacred site emits electromagnetic pulses that shift according to seasons, to solar and lunar impulses, even the Earth's rotating core. Bear in mind that a small change in the local electromagnetic field is all it takes to alter information received by human DNA. Mounds, pyramids, and underground chambers were designed to shield certain frequencies and generate an artificial energetic environment within. At Delphi and the Great Pyramid, for example, the base resonance is 7.8 Hz, which happens to be the brainwave frequency of healers and psychics when they are working. So when you interact with sacred places, these specially designed environments behave like living organisms, whose resonance alters the information received by your DNA. And in doing so, they act on the imperfections inside the body, reshaping them, enabling a person to achieve optimum health mentally, spiritually, and under the right circumstances, physically. There is one more element that creates a healing environment in sacred places, and it's one we take for granted, and that is water. All sacred sites are placed above or adjacent to springs, underground streams, holy wells, aquifers, and other bodies of water. Water is the fundamental element in every temple. The relationship between water, electromagnetism, healing, and sacred sites has been known for centuries. In Celtic times, holy people founded oracles and churches at locations where they observed animals choosing a certain spot on the land to give birth. The same observation has been made by dowsers, who saw how sick animals are attracted to hot spots where water and electromagnetism combine and generate an invisible vortex. Animals will not behave like this unless there is a direct benefit to their well-being. The English dowser Guy Underwood made hundreds of careful studies of ancient sites and Gothic cathedrals, and his drawings prove the direct relationship between the size and placement of the structures to invisible paths of energy. Science has also shown that water at holy places possesses greater properties of resonance. It can absorb a greater frequency spectrum of light, and when observed under the microscope, holy water shows hundreds of spinning vortices as though this water is truly alive. The curative properties of this living water were known to doctors in cities like London, even in the 19th century, because they regularly sent their patients 200 miles by train to sacred springs to be cured of tumours or eye problems and other afflictions they could not cure. When you build a temple over a spring or flowing underground water, the site attracts electromagnetic pathways, as shown in this image made by a magnetometer. The resonant environment inside the stone circle behaves like a vortex. And this sets up a unique correspondence with the human body, because the body is electromagnetic, and it is composed of 2/3 water, part of which is in the blood, which itself requires a vorticular motion to move it through the body's arteries and veins. It demonstrates once again how the temple and the human body are mirrors of each other. Interestingly, when water spins, it does two curious things. First, when it flows down a hole, it takes on an angle of 19.47 degrees, which happens to be the angle at which energy is released from the core of the earth. This concept was not lost on temple builders, who applied this angle to reference temples to each other on the landscape. Secondly, when it spins, water generates its own electromagnetic field, enabling water to record information. In other words, it makes water have a memory. The funny thing is, this was already known to Egyptians in 8000 BC. The Egyptian god of wisdom Jehuti wrote, "This is the property of our medicine into which the previous body of the spirits are reduced. That at first 1 part thereof shall tinge 10 parts of this perfect body, then 100, and then 1,000, and so on, infinitely on. And by how much more often the medicine is dissolved, by so much more it is increased in virtue. Today, of course, we call this process homeopathy. You take 4 drops of a solution, dilute it 1,000,000 times, and spin it, and the water retains the memory of the original solution. The idea that a highly diluted solution can retain the essence of its original was proved 40 years ago by Jacques Benveniste, whose experiments were replicated in no less than 5 independent laboratories in Europe. That water is capable of remembering the resonance of living energy was further developed by Edward Bach, whose plant tinctures still carry his name and provide healing to millions around the world. But water can also be shaped by the energy field of a human being, specifically its focused intent. Remember, the human body is 2/3 water. You add its electromagnetic field plus intention, and you have a very, very powerful tool. This was the idea proposed by Japanese scientist Masaru Emoto, whose controlled experiments clearly show the influence of human intent. Here he shows the crystalline structure of ordinary water, and the same water after it comes into contact with a photograph capturing the moment a young child imagines a positive thought. In another notable experiment, the same water was placed in 2 vials and given to 2 people. One was asked to write the words "love appreciation" with focused intent on the label. The other wrote, "You make me sick, I will kill you." The results speak for themselves. It demonstrates the power of focused intent and the capacity of resonance to exchange information between 2 organisms, to the point where another organism can be drastically altered and improved. Our story now takes a dramatic turn. For many years I wondered, what if a person lives too far from a temple? Can the resonant energy of a sacred site be tapped at a distance? And the answer is yes. And how I came about this method will surprise you. It just requires an open mind. In my first book, Secrets in the Fields, I outlined the science and evidence proving that the genuine crop circles appearing across the face of the earth in past decades incorporate identical principles used in temples. They even contain information, part of which is a code that is capable of being transferred to living organisms. In fact, I went up so far as to state that these mysterious symbols are the new temples. They certainly incorporate identical encoded geometric harmonics common to ancient temples. They reference each other as well as temples on the landscape using that 19.47 degree common to water and the earth. The visual aspect of crop circles follows the same harmonic laws of sound. And like sacred places, they contain a measurable electromagnetic field that differs significantly on the outside than inside. And when this resonant field interacts with seeds, it has been proven to increase vitality in plants, invigorating seed growth by as much as 2-to-1 compared to ordinary seeds. And the crop circles are also manifesting using the same vortex motion of energy found in nature and sacred sites. And just like sacred sites, water is fundamental to crop circles. They are always found beside sources of water or above aquifers. This infrared image shows the crop circle, how it has displaced millions of gallons of groundwater. In blind tests, it was discovered that the water from inside non-man-made crop circles was potentized up to 136% above control samples. If so, what could this be doing to people who visit these modern temples? Because all of these elements, electromagnetism, water and spin, are common to the human body. Experiments monitoring people's brainwaves inside crop circles using EEG devices show a measurable increase in right brain activity compared to normal environments. The same effect also takes place inside Gothic cathedrals. But perhaps the most startling evidence pointing to an interaction with the human biological field is how they contain a signature frequency range of 260 to 320 megahertz. In the early 70s, the body was found to be composed of a range of frequencies, much like a radio stations along the dial. But there was a noticeable range where there exist no stations, and that range is 260 to 320 hertz. So it seems that crop circles are filling in the missing frequencies of the human body and upping the frequency tenfold. It suggests there is a definitive interaction taking place between the two organisms, even more so when you consider that one particular crop circle references the points in the DNA molecule that are not coded for protein. Since both the human body and crop circles are electromagnetic organisms, the implications are extraordinary. Consider, for example, that changes in the local bioelectromagnetic field can be transmitted to DNA. And in laboratory experiments in China, it has already been shown that genetic information can be successfully transmitted from one organism to the other using this technique. Indeed, crop circles are living organisms. Just like temples and trees, they possess a measurable energy field that expresses itself in several forms: radial and concentric, like ripples in a pond. The latter is identical to the energy field shown earlier, that morphic field where an organism's information is stored. And this information is also expressed with geometry, the language of living nature. Remember how human DNA is also geometric, and how when two sympathetic geometries interact, an exchange of information takes place between organisms? Now we begin to see how crop circles could share information with people who interact with them, and why we will react to crop circles with such strong emotions. Since crop circles manifest along the same paths of magnetic energy as nearby sacred sites, many of which already come with a rich tradition of healing, it's quite possible that crop circles carry the same potential. As it turns out, there are hundreds of case histories demonstrating this. In one case, shortly before an osteopath presented a lecture, he walked through the audience and handed out copies of this image, without saying anything about it or what he was about to discuss. By the time he returned to the front of the room, a woman in the audience held up her hand and said to him that she had suffered from acute arthritis for many years, but after looking at the image of this crop circle, the pain in her joints suddenly and permanently went away. To which he replied, "Welcome to an evening of crop circles and healing." Another situation involved an 82-year-old woman called Margaret, who too had suffered pain in her joints for 15 years, to the point where she required assistance to lie down and get up. One day, her regular helpers took her for a picnic inside a crop circle that had appeared near her home. Margaret was very skeptical of these things, believing them to be clever pranks by people, but she went anyway. As they were about to sit down in the field, the two helpers moved forward to assist Margaret, but she brushed them away, saying she wanted to do this by herself. They watched her sit and lie down unassisted for the first time in over a decade, and then rise to her feet, all from being inside a crop circle. Then there was the hay fever sufferer who walked a mile into a canola field to which she was allergic, who visited a crop circle and ever since has been cured of her condition. One of the more dramatic cases involves a young man in America named Ethan, who was diagnosed with a 99% malignant eye tumor. He was put on a strict medication, which he declined to take. Meanwhile, his mother has visited a crop circle in England, and in a clairvoyant moment was told to take some of its seeds home and give them to her son. He even did exactly that for several weeks, as well as visualizing the same crop circle. When he returned to the hospital, doctors were astonished to find the tumor had gone. And when they asked Ethan how he was able to cure himself, well, the reaction was priceless. I want to share one more story. A friend of mine named Abby called me one day to tell me how she wanted to help her neighbor, a dear friend who had just been sent home from hospital to spend her last hours in peace with family. She had been diagnosed with terminal bone cancer and was given 72 hours to live. Abby asked me how she could use the crop circles to heal her friend. At this point I had to basically stop her and say, crop circles do not heal, but they do carry codes that have the capacity to influence another organism, particularly where there exists a sympathetic resonance between the two. And of course the organism, or person in this case, needs to want to heal. Contrary to belief, healing in its wider context also includes death, because for some things, dying may be the best form of healing. As bystanders, we cannot know or judge someone else's ultimate intent or purpose in life. Only they know what is best for them, consciously or otherwise. Nevertheless, Abby wanted to try it. After all, what was there to lose? So I instructed her to let her friend look through the images in my book and see if there was one she reacted to. She did, and very strongly. So I instructed Abby to take the photograph, place a vial of spring water on the image. And the next step was very important because she had to act as the conduit whereby the energy of the image was visualized being transferred into the water. She was like an intermediary. And then she created a tincture. She was to give 4 drops 4 times a day to her neighbor, much like the Bach flower remedies. As much as Abby wanted her friend to just get up and walk, I had to remind her again not to put any judgment or expectation on the outcome. Perhaps this illness was something she needed to experience. Perhaps dying was her way of healing. 2 weeks went by. Abby's neighbor, who for all intents and purposes ought to have been dead and buried, drove herself to hospital and continued to live a reasonably healthy life for several more months. It's a wonderful and true story, but there's a sad ending. The woman stopped taking the remedy, lapsed into a state of disease, and eventually passed away. When I met Abby and discussed this experience, she informed me that her neighbor was a fundamental Christian, and the fact that a seemingly alien artifact cured her frightened her. As far as her belief was concerned, this was nothing more than witchcraft. In other words, her belief prevented her accepting this magic. This energy short-circuited the connection. The energy of the crop circle was no longer able to find its sympathetic counterpart, and contact stopped. The experience taught me a useful lesson. It proved that crop circles, just like ancient temples, are not miracle cures. They do, however, contain a potential, and we are part of the process. We have to meet this potential halfway. All this was beginning to answer my original question about bringing the energy of the temple to you. The problem with using a photograph in this digital era is you cannot be certain if the original image has been distorted, because if it has, then the energy is not retained. So I had to find a more reliable method of treating organisms at a distance by tapping a subtle energy code. And this method does exist. It's called resonance therapy. It's also known as radionics. Radionics works on the principle that every living organism is surrounded by a morphic field containing a code which enables the organism to resonate with its environment. The scientist who made this discovery was Albert Abrams. While studying nature and the resonance of living organisms at Stanford University, he reached the conclusion that all disease is based on vibration. In 1924, the British Parliament investigated his outlandish claims and upheld them. maintaining that his method of transmitting a healing code to another organism across space and time does work. Abrams' method was taken a stage further by Malcolm Ray, who developed a system using a series of simulator cards where the magnetic geometric representations of remedies are stored in the form of concentric rings and radii. These cards were then fed into a device and the code transmitted to a receiving substance such as water. It was here that I made the connection. Where had I seen these patterns before? In the concentric ring and radial energy patterns of crop circles, of course. It occurred to me that if there existed a link between the two, then the crop circles also contain a resonant and potentially healing code. This is where I came across the work of the Institute of Resonance Therapy in Germany. IRT specializes in revitalizing ecosystems in distress, as well as people with all manner of ailments. Their method is to take a map of the area to be treated, or a photograph of a person, and then supply the missing code to the ecosystem in distress. They found this code hardwired in a variety of forms: radionics cards, mandalas, letters from ancient alphabets such as Sanskrit, even the symbolic language of runes. Essentially, IRT locates the organism's hard drive, supplies the appropriate software, and enables the organism to reboot and heal itself. Evidence that a sympathetic resonant code also exists in crop circles was discovered when IRT used these images to revitalize a park in Austria. The problem was this: the local council had invested a good amount of time, money and energy into landscaping this park, yet few people felt comfortable there. At the request of the local authorities, IRT quietly transmitted the code from a crop circle image from their office in Germany to this park. After 2 years of remote work, the park became a focal point for community life, as though some discarnate energy had been cleared. In researching the history of the park, it turns out that a major atrocity had been committed there during the Second World War, and the trauma of the event had been memorized by the water trapped beneath the park and trapped ever since. Later, IRT worked on revitalizing dying forests in the Czech Republic. After 3 years of ongoing treatment at a distance using crop circle images, the vitality of trees was as much as 65% above trees of similar species throughout the country. As a bonus, the first wave of crop circles appeared in the Czech Republic as a kind of validation of the work undertaken by the company. Soon, more evidence began to appear in support of the vibratory power of crop circles. In one independent experiment, the crystalline structure of tap water was photographed before and after it came into contact with a photo of a crop circle. The result, again, speaks for itself. It seems the crop circle images behave like mandalas, so the next logical step was to see whether they retained their energy field when simplified into accurate diagrams. Inspired by the Malcolm Ray simulator card system, I developed a series of crop circle resonance cards where these remedies, so to speak, are stored in their perfect vibratory state. More to the point, they achieved my original idea of being able to bring the temple to you, so you can access this tool anytime, anywhere. A number of kinesiologists were enlisted for initial trials. I gave them no instruction except to play with the cards as they saw fit. The results were dramatic. In every case, patients' energy fields reacted positively whenever the cards were used in applied kinesiology or muscle testing. In one case, despite the practitioner having a wide range of remedies at her disposal, the only positive response was when she used a crop circle card during the process. That card was then used to create a homeopathic tincture that healed the patient. So it's true, crop circles in diagrammatic form retain their information and can be accessed by any organism in distress. I place no limitations on their potential. In fact, I am constantly amazed by the unusual ways people apply them. One massage therapist tunes into the cards prior to her client's arrival and asks for the correct card to make itself known for the highest good of that client. She then uses it to stimulate the energy field of the room during a session. I personally know her approach works because she tried it on me without my knowledge, and for over an hour while lying flat on her table, all I saw in my mind's eye was the image of this very crop circle she had picked out earlier, but only showed me after the session was over. Then there's a nurse who works in a hospital where she is responsible for assisting patients before and after surgery. She asked each patient to pick a card, any card. She said that they would pick one symbol that made them smile and place the card on their belly button, the solar plexus, and watch these people losing the fear of going into the operating theatre. When they returned, still under anesthesia, she would replace the card on the solar plexus. One day, she said, a team of doctors marched into the room demanding to know why the patients in her care required fewer days of recovery after operations. Obviously, it was affecting the hospital's bottom line. And she just said, I place a crop circle card on their belly button. The doctors apparently just walked out in silence and never returned. I once saw an attendee at my lecture walk over to a set of cards sitting on a table. I hadn't mentioned anything about them. In fact, they were going to be the subject of the following day's presentation. I had not anticipated the gentleman to return because he seemed very skeptical of my work, and yet he seemed intrigued by these symbols, and then he left. The following day, he was sitting at the front row, and I expressed my surprise at seeing him again, whereupon he said, I've been smoking for 10 years. I had no idea what these cards were. I just put my hand over them, and for the past 12 hours, I've not picked up a single cigarette, nor do I feel the desire to. What is it with these things? These examples are not figments of people's imaginations, because a blind test was conducted on the cards using a device developed by Konstantin Korotkov, a physicist and president of the International Union of Medical and Applied Bioelectrography. The results show how the bioelectric energy field of an activated card is noticeably different to the card that is no more than ink on a piece of cardboard. It proves that the cards retain the information coded in the original crop circle. With the manifesting of crop circles, we are witnessing an extraordinary potential being encoded into the earth, as these new temples, like their ancient predecessors, invite us to rediscover a universal system of knowledge that help bring diseased biological systems back into harmony with their environment. We stopped building sacred places after the 13th century. We have forgotten that energy hotspots exist around the earth that help re-establish a bond between us and the natural world. And as our ancestors correctly predicted, denying this connection would result in the imbalance of the individual, an unhealthy society, and ultimately the downfall of entire cultures. It seems that the crop circles, by their design and behavior, are filling this gap, reminding us of a legacy that is waiting to be interacted with. We already know these temples can code water, so why not the potential to heal people? In 1999, it was discovered that when DNA is altered, as in the case of cancer, a single atom of ruthenium placed at each end of a short strand of DNA makes ruthenium resonate with a diseased cell, causing the deformed DNA to be corrected. Within hours of this discovery, this crop circle appeared featuring a short strand of DNA with a large atom at each end, as though validating the scientific breakthrough. Could these new temples also be encoding ideas into our biosphere? One thing is certain, like temples, stone circles, and sacred places, These symbols require a bridge that springs them into action. And by demonstrating that our intent is that bridge, ultimately, we are the co-creators of the spiritual technology. As the Hopi say, we are the ones we're waiting for. And they're right, of course. But because we are only too human, we sometimes need a little nudge from an intelligence beyond our world.